Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Harikrishna has just played knight b7. Carlson continued with f4, and with his better posted pieces here, white is well primed for an immediate kingside assault. Why delay when the opportunity presents itself? Harikrishna struck back immediately on the queen side with a5, threatening to win a pawn here on b4, and Carlson, unabashed, was more than willing to sack in with f5 in order to accelerate his kingside attack. Playing instead a3 is slower, less dynamic, and results in little pressure on the black position. After a takes b4, c takes b4, now c5, and black is wrestling the initiative away from white. Seeing this coming, Carlson preferred to sack the pawn instead, saying that black would have good counterplay from here. It's on top of the immediate initiative, because of the attack on the knight, the board is opening, which is good for the bishops. So f5 is what Carlson played. So next game, a takes b4, c takes b4, and bishop takes b4. Harikrishna is more than willing to snap up the material. For now, there's nothing better for him to do anyway. So, what does Carlson have for the pawn? The answer, excuse me, is pressure after queen g4, which brings some heavy firepower to loom on the black king side, and a considerable space advantage in the position for bringing further pieces into the attack. For the moment, black is ahead, and white doesn't have absolute compensation for the pawn, but black has to take care and play carefully in order to not face a crushing attack very quickly. Here Harikrishna, who for his part has been playing as well as Carlson and like an engine so far, continued with the equally accurate bishop c3, attacking the a1 rook and asking it the question where it's going to go. Carlson moved it to c1, returning the question to the bishop, and the idea of Carlson's move here is that if the bishop moves, then the c6 pawn is falling, and if that falls, then the d5 pawn and the c7 pawn are going to become very weak, and at a later stage probably fall as well. So he's willing to sacrifice a pawn now because he knows that he's pretty much undoubtedly going to win them back at a later stage. And Harikrishna answered here with bishop takes d4, which the engine now gave as an equal position, i.e. white has total compensation for the pawn. It preferred instead the risky line bishop b2, attacking the rook, where best play goes rook b1, again attacking the bishop, and now rook takes a2 to defend the bishop. And black goes 2 pawns up, but white still has excellent compensation after e6, and the rook being tied to the bishop here is obviously a major drawback in the position, and you don't want to have your pieces tied down to defensive roles like this, even for one move. I mean, bishop takes d4 is always possible, but after bishop takes d4 there's going to be pressure on g7, and this rook on b1 is going to be facing the knight on b7, so why give yourself these tactical problems? It's okay if you're an engine and you can solve everything perfectly, without even putting any effort into it. But from a human perspective, this is a risky continuation, so it's easy to understand Harikrishna's decision. The bishop takes d4. So now Carlson plays bishop takes d4, and this bishop here on c5, sorry, not c5, on d4 is nicely posted, pressure on the king side, also control many squares all over the board, so it's very nice. And it's important to note that after Carlson's rook c1, the advance of black's c pawn is hindered, at least for now, and this is good for him too. So here Harikrishna played a rook takes a2, snapping up a second pawn, and this is a similar line to that which we just saw, and slightly less risky for black because he doesn't have his bishop here on b2. you know, under threat, and this rook, on the contrary, is attacking the knight. And so obviously that's better for black, and he's relieved the pressure here on c6 by exchanging off a knight on d4. So he's looking to stay up in material, and you know, it's all very logical and sound. And how does white now continue? You know, he's 2 pawns down, so he has to have something forward, or he may get into trouble himself. The answer, of course, is with e6, which attacks the bishop and also threatens mate on g7, the queen and the bishop working in conjunction together. And you know, this looks like it's going to win a piece, but black has nothing to fear because of this knight on d2 being en prise if white captures on d7 next. Black's response is forced in order to avoid a quick demise, f6 to stop the mate, and white retains the initiative after knight b3, moving the attacked piece and thus forcing black to do something about this bishop here on d7 being attacked. Playing instead e takes d7 definitely, of course, favors black after rook takes d2. And these white pawns are broken up, and d7 one will fall quickly, and white has no more attack and no more pressure, and black is probably going to win in the long run. So knight b3 and bishop e8. This is forced if black wants to hold on to c6. The other move was bishop c8, and then c6 just drops. So now came knight c5, and the position as it stands is a perfect example of sound positional play. After the opening, a lot of white's pawns were on dark squares, c3, d4, and Carlson has succeeded in placing them predominantly on light squares, and this has the effect of making his bishop a much more effective piece. Also, the pawn structure damage he did in the opening is now being fully exploited, with white achieving excellent use of the c5 outpost, although exchanging off the dark squared bishop was a somewhat controversial decision from Harikrishna, because it's made white's control of c5 here all the better. And you know, he's got 2 pawns in return of it though, so that's what he's thinking is his compensation for weakening his dark squares. And you know, it often seems to be the case that Carlson forces his opponent into these difficult decisions. If he kept the bishop on, then it looked like he had to go for that earlier line we looked at, which isn't so good, and taking it off leads to this position, which also has its drawbacks. But of course, in all lines, black has 2 pawns up, so you know, he has that to look on the bright side with. So Harikrishna here played knight d6, getting his very passive knight back into the game and dealing with the threat of simply knight takes b7. And this is the best move. Playing instead of knight d6, knight takes c5 is just crazy, and losing at least the exchange after bishop takes c5. This rook on f8 has no squares. So knight d6, and now queen f3 from Carlson, and this is prophylaxis against knight e4, which will now lose a pawn. And Harikrishna answered with queen e7, and you know, he's badly cramped here. It's very tough to get any activity for his bishop or his rook on f8, and one of the aims of this move is to pressurize the c5 knight and try to regain control of the c5 square, as well as blockading the e6 pawn. Carlson responded with the rook f2, and this is another of the reasons why he played queen f3 on the previous move, so that in the event of rook takes f2, that's queen takes f2. So now came rook a5, again pressurizing and trying to reclaim c5, which Carlson was now compelled to do something about, playing knight b3, attacking the rook. Again, another idea behind queen f3 was to support this move, multi-purpose positional move, queen f3. And you know, there's no need to rush with trying to progress on the king side with the attack here. As always, Carlson is playing the position, and he has plenty of time to ensure that black has as little counterplay as possible, and he's decided to install a different piece on this c5 outpost, seeing the queen and the rook lined up here on e7 and f8 will give you some indication as to which one he's going for. So after rook b5, it's at least applying some pressure to the knight and trying to control c5. You know, white has the knight covered by the queen, as I said. Now comes bishop c5, which pins the knight to the queen, and also after that to the rook. So it's a good move. This bishop is going to be staying here for a while. Although this does have the drawback of allowing Harikrishna to liberate his position with a tactical idea. Bishop a5, sorry, h5. And this allows the second rook to come into the game, and it gets his bishop to a far more active post than where it was, or where it could have hoped to been from that square. And you know, black would be more than happy to see his bishop traded for the b3 knight. If that would happen, he could aim for knight e4, and you know, after he's resolved his pin obviously, and perhaps even gain an advantage in subsequent positions. Carlson of course had other ideas and played queen c3, again emphasizing the c5 outpost and increasing the pressure down the c file. Playing instead queen takes h5 makes the game much easier for black, as I said, after rook takes b3. Okay, that's the end of part 2.